Hi, I'm Gordon Harris, the Ipswich Town Historian, and I want to invite you to another episode of Destination Ipswich. We're here at the Ipswich Riverwalk, the very beginning of the trail, right along the river. Look behind me, this is the 1764 Choate Bridge. It's the oldest double stone arch bridge in America. So I'm here in front of the Ipswich Riverwalk mural painted by Alan PEARSALL back in 2005-2007. I was fortunate to get to watch him do this. He actually studied the history of Ipswich and then painted scenes starting with the time of settlement with the Native Americans all the way up to the present day. So what we're looking at here is Masconomet, who is the Sagamore, or the chief as we might call them, of the Agawam people who lived here. This is the depiction of those people, and you see some of the Native Americans there are sick because the Europeans brought diseases which really just about decimated the Native American people here. Here we see Masconomet signing the land away to John Winthrop Jr., who brought this group of 12 men to Ipswich originally. Scenes here we see from King Philip's War, which we were fortunate it didn't come to Ipswich. We actually had peaceful relationships with the Native Americans. The Salem witchcraft trials, it reached all the way into Ipswich as well. Ipswich is known as the birthplace of American independence. So this particular portion here depicts Reverend John Wise, Governor Andros, and the British soldiers arresting Ipswich men who called a meeting to whether the town would appoint a tax collector for the king, and we voted not to. And that was way back in 1687. A couple of years later, Boston followed suit, put the Governor Andros on a place we call Governor's Island today. And for this, Ipswich is known as the birthplace of American independence. As we go along here, here's Jenny Slough. We just named the park in her honor. She is the first black person in America to actually successfully sue for her freedom. Up here we see the soldiers at the beginning of the Revolutionary War. A number of people, including Aaron Burr and Benedict Arnold and Lafayette, rode through Ipswich in a huge mass of maybe over 1,000 soldiers on the way up to Ticonderoga in Quebec. Whipple House is shown here. Up at the top you see the Devil's Footprint. It's a great story. When we do a series up at the North Green, I'll tell you all about it. As we move along to this side here, this is Teddy Roosevelt. Whistle Stop campaign. You might have read about that in American history. And this is the people who were working at the Ipswich Mills. This was the largest hosiery mill in America way back in the early 1900s. We had a lot of Greek and Polish workers who came in to work in the mill, and they were being paid only about half of what the local-born people were being paid. So they went on strike, and unfortunately a young Greek woman was killed. The story goes on around to the modern day, but let's get on over here. I want to tell you about South Main Street. Here we are at the Ipswich River, right at the edge of our beautiful downtown Riverwalk. The river is flowing quite well now, but you may remember that last summer, and then I think it was in the summer of 2016, the drought was so bad that the river actually ran dry here. It's a tidal river. At certain times of the day, the area below the dam will fill up, and of course then at low tide, it's really the force of the river that's keeping water in it. Arthur Wesley Dow was a famous artist from Ipswich. He went on to establish a school of art that's still well known today. He not only painted and drew sketches, but he took photographs, and he referred to this area here as Little Venice. So the photographs he took showed, the people would be hanging out on their back porches. Most of the buildings are different, but not all of them. And of course, they all had the laundry lines out today. So they were environmentalists before we were, probably by necessity. And you can still see the Choate Bridge here. The building was down here, was moved from right here, because when we get around to the other side of South Main Street, you'll see where Antiques is. That was the town's first automotive dealer. The Ford dealership, the Chevy dealership were in these buildings right here. Let's walk on down the Riverwalk and we'll go to the dam. So here we are at the pedestrian bridge, and looking at the Ipswich Mills Dam. Now this isn't the first dam that was constructed here. When the settlers arrived here, they described this as the upper falls. So there was some kind of impediment to the water that created falls, very similar to the lower falls that you see on County Street. Between the Philemon Dean House and the Samuel Dutch House, which is right here, there is this little walkway that you can go out and you can see the controls for the fish ladders and how they raise and lower the water. So this is the first fish ladder that they built. It didn't turn out to be very successful because it was built wrong. The approach for the fish was right on the edge of the river, and that's not what these herring want to do. They want to swim upstream over rocks. And so another fish ladder was constructed, and this one has a turn, so it comes down further into the area of the river. Some fish do make it upstream here, but not very many. So it's still a problem that we're looking to solve. Over here is the EBSCO buildings, and one of the issues about removing the dam is what are these buildings actually sitting on because they're right on the edge of the water. We don't know if they are on perhaps concrete or stone, or perhaps more likely they might be on cypress posts. Behind us, over here is the Ipswich Visitor Center. It's the Hall Haskell House, built in the early 1800s. As we are speaking today, it's June 1st, a nice summer day. The building is actually closed for the moment. There were some fairly minor structural issues that had to be resolved, and we expect that to happen within a couple of weeks, and then we'll be able to open the facility again. In the meantime, the Ipswich Museum has graciously offered us the carriage house barn, which we'll be visiting at the end of this tour as a temporary museum. You notice that we're really in a natural area. It's been allowed, the pond has been allowed to grow up a natural vegetation. There's a lot of ferns here, and what's the reason for that is it's really remarkable that in modern society we don't have areas like this within our urban environment, and these are the natural plants that you would find in a wild field. And we pretty well eliminated them in our downtown residences. So the museum, what they're doing here is restoring something that would have been here before. We're actually the pond is just about the same water level as the river right behind it, and so this is the natural wetland. As a matter of fact, when the settlers first came here, the parts of town that we're very familiar with, Market Street, all the way between Central Street and Washington Street, there was all a wetland. It wasn't until the time when the railroad came to Ipswich and we had steam machinery that we were able to actually trench Farley's Brook, which runs under Zoomies and empties back into the Ipswich River, and dry the land out enough to begin building Market Street and what we call downtown today. After you come on this trail along the backside of Sally's Pond, there's a nice place, some stones there to sit, but the trail does continue on to the river. So just a word of warning about this trail. It's very narrow. It's been there for generations. It's raw, and there's poison ivy probably along the edges. We're in tick season, so you want to not walk into the brush. But the main thing to watch out for is there are a lot of groundhog holes. So I see that a number of them have been filled and leveled out. But I did notice one a couple of days ago when I was walking there. So when you're walking on this trail, this beautiful trail right along the river, just keep your eyes looking at the ground to make sure you don't trip and break your leg in a groundhog hole. Some kids have put a rope swing here, and there's quite a number of them on the way up. Probably this mill pond, which is formed by the dam, goes up maybe a mile or so until it gets past the railroad bridge. What we're looking across at is the part of town that's the Ipswich Mill housing, known locally as Pole Alley. The structure here is a canoe and kayak landing. We call it Peatfield Landing, and it was actually a Peatfield Landing for an actual canoe and kayak business 130 years ago or so. So we're here at the Old South Cemetery. This is the new side, and new being everything being old in Ipswich, the new side still dates back over 100 years ago. So what we're going to do here is walk up the newer side of the cemetery and then take a look at the oldest part. Then across the street from us is County Road. We're at a part of the cemetery that seems to have been reserved for the Appletons. This whole circle going around is Appletons. Now, Samuel Appleton was one of the early settlers of Ipswich. He had a son, Sam, and he had a son, John, and each one of them seems to name a son John. So if you're at the Old North Cemetery, which is even older, up on North on a high street, there must be 20 John Appletons buried there. There's a lot of names of people in the Appleton family who brought the family back to the farm, who restored it to its original size and made it a really successful working farm. Names like Fanny Lanier Appleton, General James Appleton, Francis Randall, and Daniel Appleton, Francis Randall's son, Jr. They were the last of the Appletons, about 7th and 8th generation. And then Joan Appleton, who survived her husband and deeded it over to the farm, deeded it over to the trustees of reservations. So this stone here to Pearlie B. Lakeman is just interesting to me because it just is an example of how so many families were intermarried in Ipswich. People will come and want to see gravestones of one family and say, you know, they're related to this family. And for example, here with the Pearlies were an old family from Ipswich who lived out on Linebrook Road, and the Lakemans lived down in the south part of town. But sooner or later, these various families intermarried, and that's what this stone honors, is a person who was given both the names and his full name. This is the side on the right side that was created first. The Congregational Church here really served people on the south side of the Ipswich River all the way down into the Candlewood area, and the church was established by members of that community. We're in the oldest part of the South Cemetery, and it's full of graves, as you can see, but some of the people, actually, some of the families buried their deceased in these tombs, which kind of separate the two sides. So right over there, there's a couple of them for the Brown family. I see here the Patches, that's another old Ipswich name. Spillers, we have a Spillers Lane that's close by. There's two more Browns, there's a Stone, and then when you get down to the end, there's the Wade family, and the Wades, of course, lived right in this area and built so many houses. And if you look over to the side, the trees are just so old, so huge. A lot of maples in here, and they're very well taken care of. The Ipswich Cemetery and Parks Department comes in and trims the trees, makes sure that they don't fall down, the branches don't fall down and break the gravestones. The last tomb that I mentioned was a Wade family. So these houses all along County Road here were built during the first half of the 19th century by the Wade family, and with the exception of this blue house you see in the distance. This is the largest and most historic house still standing on the South Green. It was, at least part of it was constructed by Thomas Wade. His son, Nathaniel Wade, Colonel Nathaniel Wade, was one of the leaders of the Ipswich Minutemen, the militia during the Revolutionary War. He and Ipswich men were at West Point when Benedict Arnold went to the enemy. So there's a letter inside the house, and it's the letter actually that George Washington wrote to Nathaniel Wade. He said, Colonel Wade, Benedict Arnold has gone to the enemy. This leaves you in charge immediately. I'm sure that you'll do everything that is necessary to protect us from what the British have in mind. This is the Colonel John Baker House. So again, during the Revolutionary War, the Ipswich Minutemen, we had our Minutemen, the militia, they trained here on this green, and it was the training green for the Revolutionary War. The house dates to the middle of the 18th century, and it may have elements in it that are even older. Certainly has that central chimney and the kind of look of an early Georgian house. Now behind me here is the David Baker house. Now this is a descendant of John Baker, and he built this extraordinary gable-end house, an octagon house actually. He built the house for lawyers, but it didn't really work out financially for him, so it was repossessed by Augustine Hurd, which is the Ipswich Museum, the Hurd House. So the next house over on the left is another member of the family. The house behind me is known as the Aaron Smith house. Aaron Smith married, I believe, a daughter or some member of John Baker's family. And again, it was the house was here right before the Revolutionary War. But Aaron Smith had a special skill set. He was a metal worker and is known actually for these wonderful clocks that he invented and built. I'm standing in front of one of the best preserved first period houses in America. First period houses are the houses that were constructed from the time that settlers came here, in Ipswich that would be 1634, up to about the period 1720. So the Captain John Whipple house was built in 1670, and I'm referring actually to the left side of the house. We know it was 1670 because of a science called dendrochronology, where you measure the tree rings, you count the tree rings, and the largest beams in the house, and that's done by boring a core, taking a core out of the beam and comparing them with other cores from identical species. So the Whipple house was originally located not here, but over across an institution for savings right by the railroad tracks. During the late 19th century, the house was actually being used as a tenement house for workers at the Ipswich Mills. And then in the 1930s, they moved it up Market Street, over the Choke Bridge, to this location here. Now, as I mentioned, the right side of the house, when you're looking at it, that's Major John Whipple's house, and he incorporated some details that were being used in historic houses in the late 17th century. We're at the rear of the John Whipple house, and what you're looking at is an extension of the original two houses. So first was Captain Whipple's house, which was on the left, Major Whipple's house, which was on the right, and then they added these shed extensions, which we refer today as New England salt boxes. So it apparently was done in two steps. This little shed over here was added, and then the larger shed was added as well, perhaps incorporating some of that original shed. The purpose of adding a shed, or as we call them, salt box extensions to these houses, was then you could have a new kitchen in the back of the house. We also know about Captain Whipple that he did have slaves. He had enslaved people that apparently lived in the house, and there's little quarters in the back of the house that might have been his room. So the Whipple house is owned by the Ipswich Museum. They also own Sally's Pond, which we visited earlier on in this tour. And we're going to cross over to the Ipswich Museum, also known as the Hurd House, for the final leg of this tour. I mentioned earlier on in this program that the Ipswich Visitor Center was temporarily closed, and we hope it's open up again in a couple of weeks. But the museum very graciously offered us a temporary space in their carriage barn. And so I'm here with Susan DeMarle. Is it DeMarle or DeMarle?
DeMarle.
DeMarle. And
Hi there.
I think you might have seen her before in an earlier video we did.
Yeah.
So how's it going today? We're having a few visitors?
Just a few,
Yeah?
to be honest.
Yeah.
But it's quite warm, and I think school is still in session.
Oh,
So
that's
maybe,
true, yeah.
Maybe that's part of it, but
Yeah.
we're certainly here to welcome anyone and everyone.
It's sort of a cool place. I really enjoy this because we brought a lot of our literature, our computers and everything, but they've got these wonderful carriages that we can take a look at,
Yeah.
and all for free looking as long as we're here in this facility.
That's right, yeah.
So I want to thank you for coming today for, I believe it's episode 7 of Destination Ipswich. I'm Gordon Harris, Ipswich Town Historian, and for more information, to see more pictures of historic houses, more tours, visit historicipswich.org.